To clarify, I'm a male, 17, about to be 18. One day in drawing class, I was sitting with my friend. It was only us at our table. We were talking about things like anime and WWE, recalling our weekends and such. About 5 minutes into our conversation, this guy walks over and sits next to my friend. We don't know him or his name. He's thin, wore a red and black hoodie, had blonde hair, and had scars on his face from picking at acne, I assume. My friend and I both share an annoyed look, but I could see a hint of fear in her eyes. We're pretty antisocial, so we didn't like who we didn't know, and are both pretty anxious. We all sit in silence, and my friend and I just talk with each other through slight facial expressions. After a while, this guy starts talking about the Dukes of Hazzard, which my friend and I have little interest in. He then pulled out a ticket with an autograph on it. I had faded in and out of what he was talking about, so all I said was, "Cool, man." He gives me a nod and turns to my friend, but still gives me a quick glance. He asked if we use things like Facebook, Twitter, etc. Again, this was the first time we'd ever met him, and he didn't even know our names. We both quickly say we only use Tumblr. This guy then proceeded to take out his phone and download the Tumblr app, then asked us for our profile names. We stall him on it, but he continuously asked. We obviously don't tell him our real profile names, but it gets him satisfied on the matter. My friend nervously laughs and says she doesn't even use Tumblr much. "You shouldn't laugh like that. It doesn't look right." He said that to my friend, but his eyes were latched onto me. I would have spoken up if it wasn't for how tamed I am. My friend's smile faded and she looked down to her phone before putting on her headphones. I, at the time, did not have my tablet, so I was basically forced to listen to this guy ramble on. I wasn't angry at my friend. I would have loved to ignore him like that too. He began talking about where he came from. He tells me how he burned down a small store where he used to live. He goes into horrific detail about how there were animals in the store and they probably burned to death, while bragging about how he was never caught. At this point, I am visibly disturbed, but he doesn't stop his disgusting stories. He begins to talk about his sex life. Apparently, he got a girl pregnant, but she lost the baby in a car crash. He's smiling and chuckling the entire time he's telling me all of this. He then gives me this chilling gaze and says he doesn't really like women. I feel sick at this point. "Come on, man. I don't want to hear that," I finally speak up. "But that's in the past. I've done worse." I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I tell the teacher? Well, even if I did tell the teacher, what would that do? She would most likely laugh at me for being fearful, and he would deny all this gross information. This guy's weird and disturbing stories went on until the end of class. I did my best to ignore him, and if he asked me for something, I'd just give him a brief While leaving the classroom, he taps my lower back and walks away. As of right now, I'm afraid to go back to school. I would tell, but I don't really see what anyone could do.
I'm not sure this belongs here, but as one of the strangest things to happen to me, I really would like to share it. It really is bizarre. It's a story of a man that I don't know who called me frequently for years. It started mid-ninth grade. I wasn't especially popular, so I never bothered to silence my phone in class. But that day I got a call from a restricted number and got in some trouble. When I left class, I saw I had a voicemail and naturally assumed it was a prank call. The voicemail was mostly Spanish with some I love yous thrown in. Since it was restricted, I ruled out a wrong number and assumed it was a very lame prank call. I was actually a pretty lonely kid though, so I appreciated the attention. Just as I finished checking the call, I got another. I asked him who it is and he doesn't seem to understand. I tried to ask in Spanish as well, and he switched entirely to broken English and more or less just replies in yes or no's and intrigued sounds. and always very genuinely says he loves me. I run with the lame prank call idea, but the calls never let up, and he never said much besides listening to what I say, respond with some sort of sound, and say how much he loved me. As time went on, I decided it couldn't be a student. This man called at all hours, during class, during dinner, while I slept, etc. Sometimes I'd get over like 50 calls a day at seemingly random intervals, just every few minutes. Sometimes, naturally, I'd get angry and I'd scream and threaten him, but he'd just say that he loved me. Mostly, though, I grew accustomed to it. I'd usually ignore it and delete the voicemails. Also, I was pretty depressed during those times, so sometimes I'd just answer and talk. He didn't seem to understand, so I'd just cry to him sometimes. As usual, he'd just respond with, "Oh yes, I love you," and the like. I eventually made friends and got a boyfriend. They asked about the calls, and I joked that it was my weird Spanish stalker. They at first assumed it was a prank, and I let them speak to the guy. They quickly thought it was very creepy and told him to never call back. But he always did, and yes, by then, my phone was almost always on silent. After 2 years, the calls slowed down. Maybe I'd get 1 or 2 a week or something. But then it started picking up again, and I had had enough. I went back to anger. I, in my best Spanish, told him to back off. I went vulgar and I went loud. I told him this was in no way welcomed and that I'd make sure he got in trouble. I told him it was stalking, etc., but nothing changed. No reaction more than a pouting sound and insisting that he loves me. I found a free trial of some app thing that unblocks a blocked number. I forget how. Something where it calls them back after they hang up. 800 numbers use it or something. Well, I found his number, and it had a familiar area code, but no number I recognized. They lived perhaps 30 minutes away from me, outside of my school district, though. Creepy. Well, I called him. He picked up and didn't say anything. I told him I found his number and that I'd call the cops on him. I didn't, but then I blocked him. I posted the number on Facebook, asked if anyone knew him, and I offered rewards. I went through everyone's contact lists I knew, and I never found out who it was. I don't think I'd ever met him, but no idea how he got my number, or why he kept calling for years. Really, he must not have had a job or anything, or slept very much. Well, this all happened years ago, but I still think it's a really weird, unresolved thing. Recently, I asked my boyfriend, who knows Spanish, to call the number. I went back through my Facebook post to find it, and a lady answered. As soon as my boyfriend spoke, she said not to call and hung up. He called back and she just picked up and hung up the phone. Weird.
This unsettling encounter happened to me a few weeks ago. I was on my way home from hanging out with an old friend who was home from college over the winter break. His family's place is right down the road from mine, so it's usually just a 5-minute drive. However, I was quite low on gas, low enough that I was sure I wouldn't make it home, so I stopped at the local gas station between our neighborhoods to fill up. I met my friend immediately after getting off work that night, and I hadn't had anything to drink. I'm too much of an impatient guy to just wait until I had gotten home, so I ran inside for a soda. It was quite late, and the lot was deserted, save for the sole employee's vehicle and one customer. I saw the two arguing about something as I entered, but I ignored them as I went to fill up my soda. As I'm doing so, the customer, an older man, approaches me.
"Hey, do you know how to get to the hospital from here?"
The guy looked quite dirty and smelled terribly the closer he got to me. He was acting a little on edge, and I could tell something was wrong with him. But I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, so I gave him detailed directions to the hospital, maybe a 15-minute drive at the most.
"That's what that dipshit behind the counter said, but I don't believe a thing he says. All I'm seeing is the inside of this building."
Yup, there's definitely something wrong with him. I then go through my detailed directions again after instructing him to go outside first. Apparently, this wasn't good enough for him.
"Look, I ain't from around here, Why don't you just come with me in my car and help me find it?
Well, I can't do that. Internally screaming at this point, I explained to him that I can't just leave my car here, but he's not having it. He's also standing between me and the exit at this point. Finally, I make up a story about going into work for an overnight shift, and he leaves me alone in a huff. At this point, he returns to his vehicle outside. I wait a few minutes for him to drive off, but he won't leave. Whatever. I've got to get home sooner or later. As I pay for my soda, I let the cashier know the old man was bothering me and that he should keep an eye out on him. Turning to leave, the old man is now staring directly at me. I whip out my phone and pretend to have a conversation with my girlfriend as I power walk back to my vehicle. The old man immediately shouts out of his vehicle,
Hey, come over here.
By the time I make it back to my car and lock the doors, I notice he's gotten out of his and he's heading in my direction. I peel the fuck out of there and notice the guy dash back into his car. I take off in the opposite direction of home and see his car tail my direction in my rearview mirror. I was pretty horrified at this point. I take the most roundabout route back home I could think of, and fortunately managed to lose him. I locked my front door right behind me and slept extremely poorly that night. That soda was most definitely not worth almost being kidnapped.
After my first semester of university at the beginning of May, I decided to reward myself by getting tickets for a band I wanted to see. They weren't playing in my hometown, unfortunately, and the nearest venue they were playing was in a small town 6 hours away by train. I had a friend who attended university in the town who agreed to let me stay with her, so I figured I would be fine to go up. I'd never been to this town before, but having lived in larger cities my entire life, I often associated small towns with safety. I declined my friend's offer to drive me to the concert, considering she was studying for finals, and I enjoyed a good walk. The town was divided by a river, and to cross that river, you had to first go over one bridge, then walk through a park on an island, then cross a second bridge to get back into town. To get to the first bridge from my friend's university, you had to walk down a nature trail. All this was perfectly lovely, as I did it at sunset. I had just emerged from my first winter in a rather harsher environment than I'd grown up in, and the whole nature trail park combo was filled with joggers and children playing and squirrels and everything that I had missed. This is only noteworthy in that I felt completely at ease with my route, but I was pretty distracted and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to exactly which path I had taken. The concert didn't let out until probably slightly past midnight. I got to the first bridge, crossed, and proceeded across the island to the second bridge. It was a nice night out, and I was actually sort of enjoying myself in the warm spring air. That is, until I got to a hill I didn't remember walking over on my way there. I stopped at the base of it, feeling that something was off, but eventually attributing it to the fact that I had somehow forgotten an entire hill. How funny, I thought, as I walked up the mystery hill. All of my thoughts ceased as I got to the top and found myself looking down a path into an empty carnival, and beyond that, the second bridge. Bit of context, I'm 5'7", 120-pound female, trained as a circus performer, aerialist, pretty much my entire life. This means that whatever extra weight I carry is pretty much all muscle, which serves, if for nothing else, as a boost of confidence. And also that I don't have any sort of fear of carnivals or clowns or anything. But walking over a hill I didn't remember to see an entire carnival I didn't remember definitely set me on edge. But I didn't really see any way around it. Literally, forest on either side. Plus the bridge was right there. And besides, the carnival looked abandoned, so I start off down the other side of the hill into the creepy carnival, maintaining a quick pace, definitely on high alert. I kept my focus mainly on the bridge I was aiming for. I was most of the way through when I saw the people. I saw them from far enough away that I didn't jump, but I did stop dead in my tracks. They seemed pretty normal looking by their clothes, and I was too far away to see their faces. They were sitting in whatever was available, lemonade stands, immobile roller coasters, covered picnic tables. I didn't really know what to do about any of it at all, and I'm sure there were much, much better options available. But in the moment, feeling like I had to do something, I started to walk forwards again, and as I did, I made eye contact with the first one of them I saw and held it as I walked through them. The man I had chosen to look at, I remember very vividly, looked a lot like I imagined death would look like. A gaunt, drawn-out face with no expression of any type on it, sunken eyes that followed me as the rest of his body stayed still. From what I could tell, the rest did the same. I was terrified out of my wits, and for some reason, making eye contact with this zombie of a man was the only thing that I felt was keeping me safe. I never broke eye contact with him until I reached the second bridge, so far as to opt to walk backwards down the trail. I turned and crossed the bridge at a sprint, and someone shouted behind me, which only prompted me to run faster. Now, I mentioned that the route from the university to the bridge was a nature trail. This meant that it had no lights on it and was as black as the void, trees covering up the moon and making it impossible to see anything. I didn't care. I ran down the trail, tripping over who knows what, anything to put distance between me and the creepy carnival people. Eventually, I reached a patch of light at the edge of the university and stopped. There wasn't any noise anymore, except for crickets and my own frantic breathing. If any had followed me, they hadn't done so for long. I managed to gather myself together enough and remembered that I did in fact have a cell phone, which at that point I used to call my friend and have her meet me at the well-lit spot on campus, populated by studying students. I told her what happened, and her eyes got really wide. As it turns out, unbeknownst to me, there were two trails through the park on the island, a north one and a south one. I had taken the north one on the way there and accidentally taken the south one on the way back. She told me that people never ever passed through the carnival at night, as it was where the local meth addicts would hang out. They were unpredictable at best, and at their worst, well, muggings were the least of it. I had gotten off extremely lucky. So everything ended up being explainable, but somehow that made it even worse. I didn't sleep well that night, and when my friend offered to drive me to the train station across the river the following evening, I accepted.
This didn't actually happen to me, but to a close friend of mine. Let's call her Linda. She very rarely tells this story because it gives her such severe anxiety to even think about. I, however, was one of the few to whom she told and gave permission to retell it in a public form as sort of a cautionary tale, so I will tell it just as she told it to me. Linda went to a very prestigious art school on the east coast of the United States where she studied photography. She was also an avid outdoors woman, always using any excuse she could to go hiking, camping, and to just in general surround herself in nature. So when the time came for her to begin her master's thesis, she knew instantaneously that she would incorporate her love of the outdoors with her photography project for school. She is an extremely skilled survivalist, so it wasn't uncommon for her to go on these camping trips alone. And for this project, she felt that the best way for her to capture the beauty and essence of the mountainous woodland regions would be if she completely immersed herself in the environment completely alone. Again, this wasn't unusual for her, and she always had a backup plan in place in the event of an emergency. She never gave it a second thought when she made her way out into the middle of nowhere. She spent the better part of a week out there in the woods, 50 miles in every direction from the nearest signs of civilization. When she said she wanted to immerse herself in nature, well, she really immersed herself. She hiked, getting beautiful photographs of all kinds during the day, and at night she sat by her campfire and stared at the stars, read and slept in her modest tent. As far as she could tell, everything was going off without a hitch. But on one of the last nights of her trip, after she had eaten, packed everything away carefully, and laid down in her tent to sleep, she heard some sort of animal walking carefully around her campsite. It seemed to approach her tent, presumably to give it a sniff and see if there was anything to eat. But much to her relief, it seemed to move along within a few minutes, and she was easily able to fall asleep. Nothing out of the ordinary there. Quite possibly could have been a hungry coyote or even a curious black bear. It wouldn't have been her first encounter with either, so she knew how to react in the event of whatever it was came back. But, oddly, when she stepped out of the tent the next morning, she could find no tracks or any sign that anything had been there during the night. But she didn't think too much about it, assuming the wind maybe blew away any trace of her late-night visitor, and she carried on her way. At the end of the week, she had collected all of the material she needed for her thesis and made it home safely. I was there to greet her upon her safe return, eager to steal a look at the photos she had taken on her excursion. She had been so busy, she scarcely had no time to look at them herself, so she leaned in over my shoulder as I scrolled through each miniature photograph on the screen of her camera. The first 100 were what you would expect: the moss on a tree, insects, wildlife, the horizon during sunset, etc. But towards the end, I came across something completely different. We both paused, looked at one another, then back at the screen as the blood fell hard from both of our faces. To our utter horror, the picture we were looking at was clearly not taken by Linda. It was a picture of Linda herself, asleep in her tent. We were mortified and unsure of how this could be. She was nowhere within 50 miles at least of any sort of civilization, not even a recreational campground. Even if there were other hikers out there, she would have seen some sort of sign of them if they had been anywhere near enough to stumble on her campsite. She purposefully chose an area she knew she would have virtually no chance of running into another human being. We tried to reason that perhaps the camera could have gone off spontaneously by mistake. We decided, in order to get a better view, that we would upload the photos to her computer. When we scrolled through to the picture in question, it was unmistakably clear on the monitor of her MacBook that this was no accident. It was angled above her with the lens pointed down toward her in her sleeping bag. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was clearly an ambient light of some sort, like that of a small flashlight, illuminating her petite frame against the darkness. It wasn't until she couldn't stand to look at it anymore that I even thought to click over to the next photo. But upon doing so, we violently jumped as though being physically attacked, and screamed in terror. This picture was similar to the one before it, except this one was closer, focused on her completely unaware, peacefully resting face, and, in front of it, a hairy, leathery, dirty hand held a massive hunting knife in front of the camera. It was pointed towards her closed eye, as close as it could have possibly gotten to her skin without touching it. Linda began to retch and become ill at the sight of this and moved away from the monitor. When I clicked over to the next picture, it was a photo she had taken out in the forest somewhere in the morning after the previous two photos were taken. All of the subsequent pictures were all those Linda had taken. We reported what we found to the proper authorities, but unfortunately, there was little that could be done. I don't know what that man had planned for Linda or why he left her with nothing but two creepy pictures on her camera. She was basically defenseless, so he could easily have killed or raped her if he so chose. But for some reason, he didn't. He didn't even leave any trace that he had been there. Could someone really have followed her when she began her hike, then followed her and kept up with her without leaving any trace of himself or letting her become aware of his presence? Could he have been a random transit out in the woods who just happened to stumble upon her camp? Neither sounds very plausible to us, but I suppose crazier things have happened. Whatever the answers, I'm sure we're better off not knowing. All I know for sure is that Linda will never camp out overnight anywhere by herself ever again, and for that, I am thankful. Hey guys, thank you all for watching my video, and a big thank you to LadySpook for joining me in this video. It was really awesome working with you, and hopefully we could do it again sometime. And if you guys haven't, please check out LadySpook's channel. She's got a lot of really great stuff on her channel, and I definitely think you guys will like what she's got, so please go check her channel out. And I know one lucky subscriber today does have a birthday, so happy birthday, Jerica626. Thank you so much for supporting this channel, and I hope your birthday is awesome. Now, one of my subscribers, Jack Out of the Box, asked me for some advice and us for some advice on what he should do with his problem with this guy. Now, if this problem keeps continuing or if it's done with, my best advice is, if he's still doing this, personally, I think he's a bullshit artist, but what I think you should do is just one day after class, take him aside and just tell him, do you have a fucking problem with me? Just try to talk it out as best way you can without, throwing fists. If fists do need to be thrown, make it count. That's just how I handled stuff in school and in college. If somebody had a problem with me, I would always take him to the side, in a very, closed area where there wasn't any people around, and I would just talk to him. Not saying you should murder him or anything like that, but just try and talk to him and, just see what his problem is. Personally, I think he's a bullshit artist. I mean, I've had people do that shit to me too in school, where they're just like, oh yeah, I did this and I did that, and I responded to it the same way you did, just, kind of ignored him and just say, alright, just please shut up, but that's just my advice. If anybody in the comments have anything better, please let Jack Out of the Box know if this problem keeps continuing, however. And thank you, Laura, too, for submitting your story. I really loved your story, and hopefully, and thank God, your friend is okay. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching my video. I'm sorry this outro was a bit long. I just wanted to get that advice, through to my friend Jack Out of the Box here. And, yeah, guys, thank you all for watching yet again, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.